Welcome to episode 21 of The Dive, a very special episode. Now, my good buddy Isaiah, what could we possibly be talking about today?
I think we got a couple things, but first, I would just like to say, Jatt, you look great today. We have the matter of the bet to settle here and take a spin. Yeah, let's see it in its full glory.
Just magnificent, so beautiful, my friend.
It's a sight to behold. You look just incredible. And of course, this is a result of the bet that happened last week, KT versus SKT. Jatt got to watch very sadly as KT got reverse swept, which meant he gets to wear this beautiful outfit.
Amateur over here got excited about KT as well as betting against SKT.
You didn't even watch it live or in the morning. You just like, so for instance, we have LCS the day after LCK has. So it starts at 1 a.m. You're going to go to sleep. I woke up early to watch it. So I was up at like 7 a.m., watched the first two games. It was like KT Rolster 16-2.
I can imagine his eyes.
KT Rolster like 17-1. I'm like, damn, this feels good. I'm going to 3-0. I'm going to trash talk Kobe. I knew this was the time that KT would take down SKT. And then I watched game 3. It's time to go into work. And I was like, it's all, like as soon as I saw game 3, I thought it was all over. I didn't even avoid spoilers. And then eventually Kobe came up to the cashier desk like during game 4. And I'm like, don't tell me you're going to spoil me. And he's like, oh, really? And I'm like, fuck. Just because he wasn't sad, I knew that I'd lost.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because like you're saying, I was planning on watching them that night, but after I like tweeted out and stuff, I instantly fell asleep at it was like 1 a.m. or something, or like 20 minutes before that. And then I get to bypass any sort of period where I would have been worried for SKT, and I just wake up, I see the final result, and I'm like, oh yes, just as expected. I knew all along. Not even close.
Yeah, your excellent analysis came through in the clutch. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about LCK. We're going to be talking, of course, about the NALCS, the quarterfinals that just happened, the semifinals that are coming up. We've also got 7-17, the new patch coming out. So there are some things to talk about. You guys want to start with LCK, though, since you're already on the topic?
So I am still a little bit upset that KT lost for obvious reasons, because games 1 and 2 were so one-sided. Right? Just destroyed SKT. And then they switch out, basically, they switch out Peanut for Blank. Score isn't nearly as effective for the rest of the series. Faker gets Corki in 3 games in a row. I thought that was a big thing. It's going to be kind of hard to parse through this series because it was 2 incredibly one-sided games, followed by 3 incredibly one-sided games. One thing that I didn't like, even as KT was winning the first 2 games, was their Zac priority. I think Zac is actually a bit of a trap, especially for KT Rolster, because KT has such an early game snowball ability, and Zac is not that champion. So KT banned it every time they were on blue side. Every time they're on red side, they first picked it every time they're on blue side, and then SKT just gave it to him every single time. And I think it hurt KT's early game more than people give it credit for.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate because for me, I'm like, okay, yes. Zac is definitely completely counterintuitive to that early game snowball and to like, we expect Score to basically demolish the entire game from beginning to end. But what Zac could do for SKT, theoretically, like if they're already able to snowball early games, this guaranteed like super long engage for late game and giving Score like basically another life with the passive.
And a way to close out if you're already ahead, right? Zac is incredible at diving, incredible at pushing leads because you can start the fights from so far away. And if your team is already at that gold advantage, then hey, what better champion to close out a game than Zac?
Yeah, but what did you think about the series? I'm okay with predicting KT Rolster, as sad as it was. It was close enough in the reverse sweep lore.
I mean, a lot of credit is going to be given to Blank for coming in, playing great. He deserves it. He played great. But I will also say, I don't think that the losses were all on Peanut. Like, when I look at game number 1, to me, that was such an incredibly greedy draft from SKT. They're playing against Thresh Kalista in the bot lane, and they have a Tristana Alistar. So the Tristana should outscale there. They have the Casted into LeBlanc. Okay, great. That should be another area where you can outscale. They have the Maokai. Well, that's great scaling too. And it just feels like they picked all these super late game picks across the board. And while if you actually had isolated 1v1s of Gnar versus Shen, that's great, and Castan versus LeBlanc, that's great. But the problem is the LeBlanc just split pushes, then the Shen just ults to LeBlanc, and then they 2v1 the Castan. And that happened over and over again. And they're able to kind of take over and snowball the game because of that. So to me, part of the problem in the KT wins for SKT was just their drafting. I felt like they actually improved upon that, later on. Also, the fact that they moved away from things like the Maokai and gave Blank the Gragas, which he was able to then kind of abuse the Zac, like you're talking about, to keep him down, to kind of prevent him from taking over.
Yeah.
And one of the hidden gems in the series, I thought, was Pawn's GP mid into Galio.
That was really smart.
I thought that pick was great. And we're seeing less and less Galio mid, especially even on 7/16, where he's nerfed one more time. But when we do see it, if you're a mid laner who plays Gangplank, I think it's really good. Like, the gank pressure from Galio on GP is pretty much non-existent. You can follow his ult with your ult, in a sense, to kind of neutralize his global power, and then he outscales. So I don't know why we didn't see it before. It felt like a really good pick to me.
I think it's simply because GP is one of those champions that you have to be super good at, and it's very niche now. There's not a lot of picks in mid lane that you'd want to play GP into, because he is very abusable by a lot of champions early in the game. But in this specific matchup, I don't think he's super abusable. And the fact that he has true damage on his passive against a tank, like, you can actually even win earliest trades if you're playing it right. So I thought that was really smart. But it's a champion that requires a ton of practice for maybe one or two matchups that it actually works into in competitive right now.
I feel like you have to have been a competitive player for like a year ago when Gangplank was OP and everyone was playing so much of it. Because you talk about not just the trades in lane and, the barrel chaining, which especially for team fights, like, that makes,
especially late game.
Yeah, that makes and breaks Gangplank players. But the ult usage and basically the timings and, like, the awareness of when to use your global ultimate. Sometimes you'll see even in professional play, like the new Gangplank players wasting their ultimate and not really valuing that cooldown as much.
Yeah, and then to get into a little bit more of the reverse sweep, I'm still trying to parse through how much of this was SKT adapting to what KT was doing, strategically figuring it out and then beating them handily, versus a mental block and KT tilting a little bit. Because Faker was 100 CS up on Pawn in game 4, 23 minutes in. It was really early in a mid lane flame horizon, essentially. I am fully on board with Faker being the greatest player of all time. I think in a lot of ways, he kind of just changes the rules of the game. When he's on mid lane Lucian, especially the game he had against Crown, it's like he was immune to skill shots from Talia and Jarvan. So he's super, super good. But Pawn is also a former world champion, has been able to go toe-to-toe with him in many situations. What happened in game 4? Was it tilt, or was it just
the thing is
crushing him?
So is Crown, right? And people bring up the Cassiopeia game Faker had against Crown, where he like bullied him out of lane like 3 times before 3 minutes and kept sending him back. Like, Faker, it's always in these matchups where he gets to the very edge of the amount of aggression you can possibly have in that lane and pushes it all the way to the maximum, right? And to do that, you also have to have a good understanding and good hold on junglers, where junglers are, and yes, I am going to be there for you. Like, Blank is like, I will 100% allow you to, push this matchup to the extreme. And if this guy is like level 2 is standing in front of the enemy's ranged minions and getting off, harassment in some of these examples, then
I also think it requires insane levels of confidence in your own ability. Not the Crown and guys like this obviously can pull off these sorts of plays. They're mechanically gifted enough. They're very skilled, even guys like Pawn. But Faker has such supreme confidence, it feels like, in his own play, that he is not worried about what if it goes wrong, because he doesn't think it ever will go wrong. And yes, it sometimes does, but he's able to pull off these insanely aggressive plays in lane to bully people out, to zone them off, even build-wise. When you're looking at the Corki, he's skipping Hexdrinker pretty much every time in this series, going straight for a Sheen, because he's like, well, Hexdrinker only matters if I get hit by stuff. I'm not going to get hit by stuff. Why would you get hit by stuff, right? I'm just going to kill him instead. That's fine.
It's funny because there have been periods in SKT's past, mostly during the regular season, where everyone's been like, oh my God, everyone's having so much success camping Faker and punishing that play style. But Faker has had such a long history and gone through so many of those instances that you're right. Like, he has that supreme confidence. If there is one player who should have the supreme confidence,
it's true,
in the game, then it definitely is him.
I mean, I remember watching the playoffs where they didn't make it to the number, like the last time they didn't win the championship in the LCK. I think he was playing Karma mid with teleport against Lysandra. And it's like, I don't care how much you want to outplay that, they're just going to chain CC you and camp you. But when he's on stuff like Corki and Lucian against champions that don't have the hard CC lockdown, that have to land skill shots, he's a god. Like, he's actually, yes, SKT is playing well as a team, but I feel like Faker, for the most part, is just like transcending that position unless you have some way of fully locking him down. He's as close to as single-handedly carrying a lot of these games as I think you can.
And you always have to put so many resources into trying to deal with him, even if it is successful. Oftentimes, the game plan has to be built around dealing with Faker, and it's not like there's not other players on SKT who can take over the games. They're going to create pressure in their lanes. They're going to be very successful. So I always feel like so much of it comes down to, is the jungler doing well? And if the jungler for SKT is doing well, there's almost no chance, it feels like, for the other team to win, because these lanes draw so much pressure, and it has to be, Score or whoever is playing against them that actually makes the difference, that swings these lanes, that puts them in their own favor.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to also touch on the jungle point you guys were sort of talking about before with the champions, just simply the champion pools right now. And even though there are so many of these tanks available, I have really felt like Gragas and Jarvan, to me, especially for a professional play, just provide so much versatility that those are my top 2 picks, and then Sejuani is kind of right there. But I just feel like the versatility of Jarvan and Gragas can't really be overcome by any of the other ones. And you can talk about, oh yeah, Zach, has longer engage, and there are these things, but
What about
weaker in the
Maokai?
early
He's off.
game. Maokai, I feel like, is better as a top laner, especially after the nerfs to the saplings.
Yep. Me too.
And that may be biased because of the Dignitas game where
Yeah.
we saw Someday on it over and over again, but I actually was feeling that way after the nerfs anyway.
I still like Elise if you're good at snowballing around a laner with reliable CC, because that's one of those low counterplay things you can do. Like Renekton Elise lane is almost always going to win a 2v2 top lane, and you can play around that.
Yeah, it's just for me so scary watching those games for that Elise, because then I always find myself kind of rooting for them, like, especially if they're going like Mobies and stuff, because you're like, oh
you're on
yeah,
a clock.
go around and get all these kills, but I have this feeling, I know the games in this meta almost always turn into 5v5s later, and then you're gonna have to play the 5-on-5 really well as Elise. Like skirting around, hitting your ranged abilities first, and choosing your timings and stuff to have a similar effectiveness.
And I do agree with you that you can smash those 2v2s and you can make things happen. And if you find that jungler and you kill him, and then you win 2v2 topside, and then you're snowballing there, that's incredible, and it works very well. But the onus almost always feels like it's on the Elise.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's so many picks in the meta now that are very popular, where you're just saying, oh, I have farm and I'm not dying, well, I'm winning the game. And I think that picks like that are so powerful and have shown up time and time again, both in North America and in Europe. Mentioning the top lane games for Someday, right? Maokai is a pick like that. Doesn't matter if you're down CS, because you're going to be so strong in the team fights. Tristana is another one that feels like that to me as well, where it's this pick that is, as long as you're in the game, as long as you are relevant, you have that chance to win. And it feels like, because some of these picks are relatively stable even in the earlier stages, that these more risky picks are kind of getting pushed out, the ones like Elise.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to touch on in this series, though, as much as I talked about like Faker and solo carrying games, Wolf, I thought, really stepped up in games 3, 4, and 5, specifically Rakan and Blitzcrank. But more so Rakan is this pick that we saw getting banned a bunch in the LCK playoffs, where it had kind of fallen off a little bit more kind of around the world. But it seems like it's back, because the way at least SKT was playing these games is they're going to be able to keep it really close. And then Wolves Rakan's getting that initiation that they need to turn the game around. And it's a power pick for SKT, but specifically when Wolf was playing it, those last 3 games were really good.
It was also really interesting because SKT was banning it in the games that they didn't play it, right? So they actually banned it out in games 1 and 2. They picked it every time it was up. So games 3 and 5, it was available. They picked it in both of those. And KT banned it in game 4. So Rakan was actually 100% presence in this series. And whether it's because of just these specific players, or it's becoming more meta in Korea in general, I'm not 100% sure, but we did see how powerful it can still be and how effective it can still be, and how teams are willing to maybe take a little bit of a weaker laning phase because of how you can make up for it later on.
Yeah. Real quick, who wins? SKT versus Longzhu?
SKT.
I'm staying with SKT.
Longzhu has to be so scared, I feel like, going into the finals against this. This is actually the first time a team in the LCK history has started in the wildcard match and made it to the finals. SKT already has history behind them with so much success in the past, so much confidence. They're coming in off the reverse sweep. They're coming in after dominating Samsung, smashing Africa. Like, they're doing so well in these matches leading up to it. And then you talk about the fact that Longzhu is lacking experience in a lot of their roles. I feel like you are so scared going into this match as Longshu.
Definitely some of the interviews that we've seen translated give off that kind of vibe from Longshu. They're talking about, oh
Mhm.
yeah, we 100% from the beginning like expected it to be SKT or KT coming to meet us, and BDD's talking about being Faker's fan. And Faker's like, yeah, that's great. I am still going to beat you. So
Yeah.
thank you for your
I'll give you a picture
patronage.
after the series.
But I also kind of wanted to bring up, and I only saw this on Reddit, so this isn't like I did any investigative
You
journalism or
talked to Faker
anything.
yourself.
But
The Redditors did it
people
for you.
people were, and it wasn't even like hard facts. They were just theorizing. They're like, well, since there was this interview where SKT and KT talked about helping each other as far as being basically permanent scrim partners, who have Longshu been scrimming leading up to this? Because it eliminates so many of the possible, strong opponents. Because Samsung also, has reasons like they don't want Longshu to actually win the finals
Mhm.
because it'll benefit
Mhm.
them if SKT actually do. So it brought up to me a question of like, oh, because that's always something that kind of circles around when you get to Worlds or when you get
Yeah.
into playoffs
It's
and
actually a
stuff.
really good point.
Scrim partners, valuable scrim
It's true.
partners that are that good at League of Legends are so scarce.
And one of the reasons that they, just to add on, that they actually want SKT to win is because, so I believe if SKT wins, then KT also goes to Worlds, right? I believe that's
Yes.
how it works.
That's how it works.
So wouldn't Samsung then actually want Longshu to win? Because that would mean KT wouldn't go through for free. So it's kind of, there is some
Yeah,
complications.
It all
to
depends
it
on
as
if
far as
Samsung would rather
championship points.
play Longzhu or KT.
Yeah, so it is very interesting, and there can be a lot of strategy coming
It's-
down to that. So
yeah.
if Samsung isn't scrimming them,
It's because of their
Who do they
points, and I think
play?
that Samsung would rather play Longzhu. So I think that was
Longzhu's
why.
in a tough spot. Winning, you're in for sure because they're in the finals. But the fear of SKT, almost more than anything else, makes you have to vote for them because yes, they reverse swept, but they looked pretty bad in 2 games against KT. But you just don't remember that. You remember Faker, the 3 World Championships, the way they always seem to win in the end. So I can't not vote for SKT in the final.
That's the thing about reverse sweeps. Even though it's this 5-game series and it's so close,
like worse than
after it's over, everyone's like, "Oh my god, they got blasted!" Because you remember they got the last 3 games were all super SKT heavy, and you're like, "I knew it all along."
Yeah.
With reverse sweeps, it also feels so much worse, I feel like, than losing just a regular series. I actually think it's so much worse than just getting 3-0'd because of how bad it feels. When you lose, when you're up 2-0, you lose the first game, you're like, it's fine, we still got it. But you start doing bad in that 4th game, and it starts getting really in your head. You're like, oh God, we're probably going to be tied. Oh God, they only have to win 1 more game. What happened? How did we lose? You can get so in your own head. And there's almost no teams in the world that you still always feel like they're in it, even when they're down so far, like SKT. And that just speaks to their prowess and how strong of a team they are, both mentally and individually.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, coach's split and rookie of the split have been announced.
Did you want to touch on the European playoffs while we're on international playoffs first, or
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, as far as semifinals go, I'm most interested in G2 versus H2K, only because G2 has won 3 splits in a row,
Yeah.
and they looked super shaky. Even in Game 5 of their quarterfinal match, they were so close. I feel like to being eliminated. But that is another one of those European teams that even when they went 1-5 at Rift Rivals, all the other European teams are like, yeah, but they're still G2, man. They're still really good. I think they're going to pull it together in the end. So they have that reputation, at least in Europe. But it's been a long time coming for H2K, I feel like, to find some severe success in EU. So if there's a time for G2 to actually be, destroyed, it might be in the semifinals here.
Yeah, it's been interesting kind of following the story there for G2 after coming back from, MSI and Rift Rivals and stuff. And the high highs were almost immediately followed by, very rocky recovery in Europe. And fans have been bringing up that exact question of how long do we give them credit for? This is G2. We know their this success in Europe has been very long lasting and such a complete dominance. For years, but how much credit do you give them? How long does that?
It's to me, it's kind of similar to what we did with Cloud9, where you still kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't always play out that way. I mean, G2 very clearly is not as dominant now as they have been in the past. They hadn't lost a series in Europe for what, a year and a half, something like that. They have lost a lot of series this split in Europe. And going into playoffs, they didn't look as strong, right? They're certainly much more vulnerable now. And although there is some kind of credence to be given to the fact that they have been dominant in the past, they have experience, they know how to play and win on these big stages, you still have to look at the recent results and how they've been playing in the last while and realize that this team is more vulnerable than they probably ever have been.
Yeah, I think actually the best example I could have would have been COG in Spring Split.
That's really
of
good
this
example,
year,
yeah.
where they were like, oh yeah, we're really experienced, we're going to pull it together for playoffs. But at least in League, if you're not SKT, but this is generally kind of what I've been going with, you generally can't just turn it on in playoffs, right? You can't just have a bunch of struggles during the regular season and best of threes and be like, well, as soon as best of fives hit, I mean, it's a totally different game, really. No, you're just playing 2 extra Summoner's Rift games in the series, and it's really hard to flip that switch at the end of the year. And I think when G2 played Splice and they were both 8-5 teams, it was a series between 2 8-5 teams. It was as close as you would expect. So the aura of G2 is gone, and they just kind of have to prove that they are better now than the team that's higher seed than them, which is going to be hard.
Yeah. When you told me this morning too that you were interested in that G2 semifinal, I looked at the other one and I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna see Fnatic again, who are always like super exciting play styles, and they also have these older name players that we remember for so long. So that makes it more interesting. On top of the fact that Misfits game versus Unicorns of Loves was absolutely insane, and they had the pentakill from Hansama, and he got Tristana all 3 games, and people are like, wait a second, why is that still getting
why are you
through?
giving him
But,
every game?
I'm actually pretty excited for that one too now that I looked more into it, because as well, I was like trash talk, and I found a Jez's interview. He predicted not only Misfits to actually beat Unicorns of Love, but then he says, and we will stomp Misfits because they're terrible. I was like, yes, that's the kind of trash talk that gets you.
And
like,
Fnatic,
that's actually even more brutal for Unicorns of Love.
Yeah.
He's like, Misfits is terrible. We're gonna smash them, but first they're gonna smash you as well. Who's even worse?
Yeah, I was like, wait a second, is that the actual quote? Oh, whoa.
Yeah, it's premonition, man. At least for Fnatic, they are always a confident team. I know going into Rift Rivals, they were like, our unique style will smash everyone, and then they bounce back. They bounce back super fast. Like a week after Rift Rivals, they say, we were wrong. We were going to play meta and be better. And they were. They switched up, and they still are the #1 seed, and they kept winning in Europe. So I agree with Jess's right now. I think they're doing for finals.
Yeah, I was looking over the stats for Europe, and just across the board,
they have crushed.
Everything at the top is Fnatic.
Yeah, they have been. I mean, I think a lot of that is the fact that G2 fell off a little bit, but they've been head and shoulders above a lot of the other guys. Anyway, rookie of the split, coach of the split, NALCS. Not too many surprises.
No.
I mean, we didn't have that many rookies.
Yeah, there weren't that many rookies. We talked about rookie of the split a couple weeks back and kind of came to the conclusion that we felt like Mike Young was a shoo-in. I am glad that Niski got some credit and actually was up there in the voting. We all ended up voting for Mike Young for rookie of the split, but I think probably all had Niski as #2 as well, I'm assuming. So I do think that he was actually deserving to be up there, and especially how he played in playoffs ended up kind of lending more credence to that, even though it doesn't actually count into the results.
Yeah, I mean, this was going to be, I felt like, a Mike Young award. And even though Niski did well and made the playoffs in 1 more games, that's kind of the argument you use for Niski. But I thought Mike Young played many more games. He ended the split poorly, but I looked at it as a complete split award. And I thought Mike's highs were higher than Niski's highs. And that's essentially why he got it, but it was pretty close, and I can see why people would go for Niski.
Yeah, I think they were actually a lot higher, because when you think of Niski, even though I think he had some really good games, there was no point in my mind at all where I was thinking, oh yeah, Niski's better than Huhi and Froggen and Jensen and Bjergsen. He's the best now. Whereas Mike Young, for a while there, you're like, is he just the best jungler? Yeah, maybe he is. And
if we didn't patch the game, there's a chance he would have continued to have some of that success.
Yeah.
But
and he's not the best jungler, but maybe he could grow into that, right? Maybe he can actually bounce into that. Do you guys want to talk about coach a little bit?
Has the coach been released?
Yep.
It has.
Okay, cool.
So
Then,
Song was #1, Parth #2, Zix #3.
Song #1 by a lot,
Yeah.
as well. 89 points to 47 points. And I know we had Parth on the episode 2 weeks ago, and he kind of mentioned some of the flaws of the Coach of the Split award, which a lot of them I agree with. It is hard to know exactly what a coach is doing, but the transformation of this Immortals team from last split as a 7th place team, adding Song, adding Xmithy, and then being so cohesive as a unit, as well as all the players speaking so highly of Song to now be a team that has the tied for the same match record as the top team in the league. Like, I felt like this is a well-deserved award for as much as we can know about what coaches do.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised by either of the results of the Rookie of the Split or the Coach of the Split for all positions, actually, 1 through 3. And, it definitely is a good point to bring up about, that Parth's talking about, because, like, we don't examine all aspects of coaching, and we have to go off of these little kernels of information and then kind of make that next leap. With Immortals, that next leap seemed very easy because there weren't too many other factors. We're like, all right, we boil it down to the changes they made. Smithy and Song come in. First interview I did this year with Pobelter, he's crediting Song directly, as well as Smithy. And then, like, as you said, all the players consistently have all these things they're talking about him, and the change in this team, the standings, even just looking at the standings. But the performances of all those players just...
And how they did it, right? Their macro play seems to have improved a lot. It was not a complete overhaul of the team. It's not like Song comes in alongside Faker and, oh, wow, they won, they did it. It's a lot of the players that have been around for a long time and have not only improved individually, but as a team, it feels like they came together so much more. The difference between how Flame played around the team this split versus previous, and even their bot lane playing so well. So I definitely think it is deserved. And while we're never going to know with 100% certainty who has done the most, I think that he is deserving, and I'm pretty happy with how all the awards have turned out.
Yeah, I think Parth and Zix also deserving of their spots, by the way.
The only one that I would wonder a little bit is Cop, because I feel like in the past I've had him high on my ballot. I think his drafting has been particularly good, but I never know kind of how the other elements go with that team. And Team Nikitas is another team that showed a lot of improvement, but that's a team that had so many more moving parts.
Exactly.
Right? He was their coach in a lot of the spring split as well. They've switched out 3 of their starters. But if you were to take it from the mindset of, like, where is the baseline for the 5 players on this roster? And then the coach would be, how does that move them up and down? You take a roster with, Shrimp, Keen, Altec, Adrian, and someday...
Yeah, you're just not... Yeah,
you got to leave that guy on the side.
Yeah.
But you could make an argument that those are players that have never found that much success. So the coaching is probably doing pretty well for that team. So he kind of gets left on the side because there was so much change, but I think Cop had a good split as well.
I definitely agree. Honorable mention for sure.
Yeah.
And now 717, you guys want to talk about that a little bit? It has just been released, the patch notes, and there were some pretty interesting changes. I wanted to touch a little bit on Leona before we get too much more into it, because Leona was one of the ones that actually stood out as pretty interesting to me. There you go. That's why I went first. That's why I introduced the topic, so you can maybe talk about some Hecarim or something. But Leona, basically, she had some changes. So the passive for Sunlight, the duration of the mark, like basically the window you have to actually proc the damage, went down quite a bit from 3.5 to 1.5, but the damage did go up both at early levels and scaling towards the end of the game. And then the big one is your Q stun went from 9 to 5 seconds. It was the old scaling of ranks. Now it's a flat 6.
So essentially you're changing your max order.
Exactly. It's now a 1-point wonder, so you can max your E second. It gives you a lot more mobility to move around in fights because you can actually have the lower cooldown on your Zenith Blade. You're still going to max your W first, but this makes this a 1-point wonder. It increases your strength at lower levels and increases your mobility in these mid-game fights where you can actually zip around, because as the E is typically your last max, as a support, you pretty much never get to actually max that, right? So that's even more impactful when you change around things like this than it is for a solo laner, because you generally have so much less experience. So I do think that this is actually pretty exciting, especially when you do still see some very squishy supports coming in from time to time. Things like if like a Nami or a Lulu or these sorts of champions do come in, Leona could be used more often as an answer to that. One thing that is also kind of funny, though, about it to me is Janna is already kind of god tier support, at least in solo queue, and Janna smashes Leona. So this is kind of
So does Alistair.
It's kind of like a buff almost to Janna.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention with patch 717 is this is a patch that'll probably not see competitive play. The majority of playoffs are on 716. A few of them are on 715. And then Worlds is going to be 718. So this patch, at least talking to the design team, is intentionally small. and it's specifically trying to be as low disruption as possible to competitive changes. So any of these changes would be kind of targeted towards the solo queue game. The one that I'm going to talk about quickly is the Ardent Sensor, because they actually really didn't want to make any systemic item changes, because those are generally more disruptive to the overall game state and take a longer time to filter out, and there's not enough time before Worlds. But Ardent Sensor had caught on so much and was almost so disruptive to the solo queue game that it had to be changed.
You have to. When the point comes that Trundle and champions like this in support are building an Ardent Sensor
I built
first.
it on a Moo the other day, and I was like, this feels pretty good.
Exactly. Like
All right.
people are changing not only their item build, they're changing their mastery specifically to take Stormborn packs so that they can proc Ardent Sensor on more people.
Yeah.
This item was so warping as far as gameplay, as far as meta, as far as everything.
And I do think it's a little bit of a lesson, though, because I want to talk about Ardent Sensor a little bit more, Kobe.
Keep going.
This item was changed to be as good as it was at like the start of the year on like patch 7.2. So people were very, very slow at switching over to this item because it has been this good for 4 months. And it's just a matter of not really realizing how much attack speed and how much health you're getting at such a low gold value, as well as having good stats. I'm a little bit disappointed that it took this long to catch on. And then everyone just universally agrees that, oh, this item is super busted when it had been along for so long. But I was one of the early adopters. It's been super busted for a while.
Yeah.
You guys are on the Ivory train.
Well, I was going to say that was the thing that actually forced me onto Ardent Sensor. I feel like people didn't even intentionally ever switch over to being like on the Ardent Sensor train. It was after all of the other shield buffing items were nerfed. Like Redemption got nerfed, Locket got changed. Like there are nerfs to all these other ones. And I was sitting here playing Ivern and I'm like, well, what are the other shield buffing items? Ardent Sensor? I guess that one didn't get nerfed. I'll rush that one. Yeah. And there's no like visual confirmation or like you don't see much bigger numbers in any sort of way. So that's probably why it was so slow for people to pick it up.
You bring up a good point though with how needed Redemption was in an organized game, because
at least how needed people thought it was.
Well, yeah, true. I felt like the impact of Redemption was huge, at least on Ivern. Like as soon as you get that, if you force any type of team fight in front of a turret, you win. And I don't know if Ardent Sensor was actually even as good as that for that instance of damage. But now that it's gone, as soon as you rush it, you're like full sustaining all of your lanes with the heal, which is something I think people didn't realize before.
And I mean, I think part of the discussion for me, and I'd almost challenge that, and I'm not 100% confident that it was more impactful.
Yeah.
It's that it feels more appreciable to like what you're talking about, right? You don't always notice what it's doing. It's kind of the Sona effect. You get all these random free stats, and you're like, oh yeah, we won, but that felt good. That felt normal. You don't always credit all these little buffs that you're getting, all these little stats.
I'm playing Vayne. So I outplayed him. That was all me, baby.
Exactly. Like, it's so hard to tell. Whereas I press Redemption, big ass circle on my screen, comes down, huge animation, the health goes up. Wow, that was so good. Of course, that's why we won the fight. You're not necessarily going to notice the fact that Ardent Sensor made people heal for a couple hundred during this fight because of the on-hit, and they attacked faster, which procced Vayne's Silver Bullets one hit earlier than she would have died, which killed the guy, and all this other stuff. You don't notice it. It just happens, and you're like, of course that happened. I played well.
Yeah, and doing Baron with this item is ridiculous, especially if you're on someone like Sona or Taric. But anyway, talk about the actual nerf. It's not hit that badly. It used to be a 20 to 35% attack speed and 20 to 35 health drain buff as you level up. Now it's 25% of all ranks, which is level 7. So that's about when people would get it. So what it means now is if you rush Ardent Sensor, it's pretty much as strong as it was when you rushed it, maybe a tiny bit weaker, but then will be 12% weaker with just those stats. It's still going to give 60 AP. It's still going to give CDR.
Remember, you're also not getting to level 18 as a support, so you never really reach the cap of that anyway.
Yeah, I still like the item. It is nerfed, justifiably so. I don't know if it'll get nerfed again, but I like the fact that it's nerfed but not completely destroyed because it's a fun item to play with.
What do you think about Hecarim, though, Kobe? Because that seemed pretty interesting to me. I know you're a Hecarim guy.
All right, we're done with Ardent Sensor.
The reason I had started playing Hecarim a bunch like a couple of weeks ago is because on the PvE, there was this buff, and then there was also a bunch more buffs. Like they added a whole bunch more damage, and like
they baited you.
They baited me because when I saw the actual patch notes, I was like, wait a second, where's the rest of the buffs? And they had like they had a couple other ones in there, but they pulled them off because it definitely was too strong on the beta realm. But now I'm just kind of like, these are nice. I'm very curious to see like kind of what the solo queue win rate changes are, but it's not going to be hugely impactful. Hecarim's problem has always been, ramping up and kind of the early game
Mhm.
before you get to your Trinity Force.
Mhm.
You really get to start playing when you have Trinity Force, and then he feels extremely fun, but getting taken advantage of earlier than that, and these issues don't really solve it. I'll be very curious to see how much like a full range onslaught, 0.5 more seconds on my fear sounds pretty good,
That's what I was gonna ask you.
but
Do you think that this could warp some of the builds that you could do? Like, would you be able to do something like a tank CDR build? And this is more of a team fight initiator with CC. I know you're looking like that's disgusting. I'm just curious, could these sorts of things actually work, right? Because we've seen Jarvan go from this guy who was all about, building warrior earlier to this guy who's supportive and tanky. Could you just go,
Cinderhulk, Knight's Vow,
Cinderhulk, Knight's Vow, Frozen Heart,
Hardened Sensor.
and Hardened Sensor, Stoneborn Pact, and get in there
let
and
me
use
stop you right here.
Okay.
A no.
Okay.
I need one of those memes where Hecarim without Trinity Force, Hecarim with
The
Trinity Force.
Deficio or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a really dated analogy, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I used to like 40% CDR tank Hecarim like 4 years ago.
There you go.
Have you tried it lately?
See,
Jatt has liked a lot
Jatt
of things
likes
that I
me.
do not like, so
Yeah.
that's fine.
You don't even have to auto attack once you start. You just queue constantly.
just running around helicopter.
It's the helicopter build, yeah.
I'm just gonna pretend that Jatt doesn't like Udyr, so that this leans more crit. I'm like, yeah, he loves my idea. My idea
Yeah.
is great.
I got 16 kills on Devour or Bloodraiser Volibear last night.
There you
Yeah.
go.
It's not good.
To your point, though, full tank Hecarim with a Trinity Force
Yeah.
is fine and always has been fine.
Just
I personally really like going Trinity Force and then getting the Ghost Blade because there were new move speed buffs to Ghost Blade, and flat armor penetration actually is quite good for him because of the helicopter. But both those variations are decent for solo queue. Not gonna be big competitive.
And that's the thing about this patch is it's pretty small, right? You're
It
going
was
to want to
meant
try
to be
out
a
Leona.
two-parter, like in tandem with
Mhm.
718.
Yeah, exactly. I think the competitive tweaks will end up hitting at 718 because those are going to be mildly reactive to playoffs and the teams
Mhm.
going to Worlds. And that hasn't happened yet. Those playoffs aren't done. So definitely different goals for different patches this year. The last few patches, like 14, 15, 16, very competitively focused. This one's just making sure nothing's super out of line in solo queue, like the huge ban rate on Draven. Give him a little tap.
Yeah.
I hate having ban Draven every game too.
By the way, some people we always see pros and stuff complain about why would they nerfing this champion or whatever. Some changes are aimed purely at solo queue. Draven is
and
not.
lower levels of solo queue
Yeah.
sometimes. It's
You
not
know,
just challenge.
Some champions are not dominating in challenger, may not even get picked in
Mhm.
challenger. Yet 50% of the player base who is silver and below,
I thought you were going to say who's not challenger.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? But yeah.
more
Yeah,
than 50% is not challenger,
I
but
think-
50% is also not challenger.
I think it's over 70% of the player base is silver and bronze, right? So you
Yeah.
do have to balance some around that. They do obviously a lot of balance changes focused at competitive play and
Mhm.
focused at the peaks. But if something is that high ban rate, it's always going to get some attention, whether it's high win rate or not, because it feels bad to play against. And Draven is one of those champions that can feel very bad to play against. So that's why it's going to get hit. Ornn also coming out in 717, which is pretty interesting. This guy is introducing some very new stuff we've talked about in
Yeah.
the past, but the fact that you can buy your own items out on the map, that you can upgrade your teammates' items, and I believe it's called Brittle. I always keep forgetting, but the passive
Reverse tenacity.
exactly. So it increases how long these CC last. So there's some new mechanics, pretty interesting stuff. I have not gotten a chance to play with him on PBE or anything like that, but he does seem pretty cool. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's going to be turned off for Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
It's very unique, and
I think it's a he. You can call him a he.
he is unique. I have
Your boy
trouble-
Ornn.
I have trouble with that.
But I
sometimes.
may be
Repside and all that
assuming
stuff.
maybe he's just
yeah,
an ram human.
Maybe he's
thing.
just a forge.
yeah, he's just a forge. But everyone is tunneled on he can upgrade, the 12 items for 1,000 gold and make you a super black cleaver, or that he can buy items while out on the map. That's one very small part of the kit. So, yes, that is some very unique game-changing stuff. But then he's still got 4 abilities that could be any shop can be a forge, and then the 4 abilities coming after that. So that's going to make this champion a little bit weird to judge at first. And him being able to buy items while out on the map, he can't buy consumables, right? So he's not going to be able to buy wards or potions. But being able, as you mentioned, to buy rejuve beads or health crystals in lane, or especially late game, being able to pick up a Warmogs or something, does seem like it's going to have a decent amount of power. And the last thing before we get into the kit would be the upgraded items like the Mega Black Cleaver and the Super Infinity Edge aren't also super efficient. So you're paying 1,000 gold to get about 1,000 more gold worth of stats on those items. So it's going to help you at 6 items, which is quite rare.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. It's more about maximizing the peak performance after you already have used all your inventory slots. I am still, because I don't think they released the technical changes to those items that he's going to give. Did they give the actual stats?
So
I was
you can
holding
find
out.
them.
It should be on. It should have been on
yeah.
PB, so you could probably find them.
Okay.
What do you want to know?
I mean, if it hasn't made a big splash or anything, I was actually hoping that it would change the way that you play with these items. I was hoping
I think
for
it's just stats.
I was hoping for something like the Trinity Force proc is now on an internal cooldown of like 0.5 seconds or something.
Right, like a
and you're like,
buff.
oh, I'm playing Hecarim. I'm definitely playing Hecarim. Give me Ornn now. Like something like that would like change the way that you could actually play the game. But if all of them are like you're talking about just pure 1,000 gold stat increase for 1,000 more gold, then it's not really as interesting.
Like
to me
Infinity Edge has 100 AD instead of 70.
Okay.
And you pay 1,000 gold for it.
Yeah.
But it's cool in red.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's okay then. But
is it big?
One thing I think is going to be the most interesting part about it is also the play against type factor of Ornn, because laning against him is going to be very interesting in that you have to play around his power spikes when he hasn't even left lane, right? He can just immediately step into the bush, bang his hammer a little bit. Now he has a new item. So this guy could have enough gold for a Tiamat, and you're still sitting there in lane with your Doran's Blade. You haven't actually had a chance to go back. So you're going to have to play very differently, I think, against him. And there also could be quite a bit of play around keeping him in combat so he can't actually, buy his items, or that he has to at least back up quite a bit and give something up to actually purchase those items, because there's a lot of champions that can, from a decent range, actually deal with that. I'm thinking of something like Maokai. I believe it's about a 3-second channel to actually buy the items. So Maokai could just keep throwing a sapling on you. You'd have to back way up.
You have to be out of combat. It's almost like imagine your boots of mobility have to come up. It's like 3 or 4 seconds, then you get back in there. Interesting things about this kit, especially like watching the spotlight, is I think it's going to be pretty difficult to actually set up plays with. Like the whole throw the Q behind the target, get the rock to come out of the ground, slap him into that rock. Anything can go wrong, and that's basically your whole kit. So, like, yes, you can pull off some... I'm wearing this thing the whole episode. Yes, you can pull off these somewhat sick combos, but so many things can disrupt him while he's trying to do that stuff. So I think he's going to be really hard to play against. And I think what's going to decide whether he's in pro play or not is whether it's easy enough to counterplay against that. Because, you can get good to execute it, but there's going to be so much stuff that can disrupt you.
Another really big thing for me is always, can you push the lane? Like, how good is your pushing power? When I think of top laners that I want to play, so much of the time it revolves around, well, can I shove them in? And if you can shove people in very heavily, then you have so much more power because you can roam. You can get, even if it's not to make a gank, the ability to actually move out and get deep vision protects you so much in top lane. And if you're shoved under your turret, it's so easy to set up dives on you and these sorts of plays. So can I actually maintain a push with his W? That's what's going to really decide for me if this guy is very strong, because all these cool parts to his kit aside, if I can't actually win my lane matchup, it doesn't really matter.
Top laners are tough like that.
His ult does seem pretty fun, though. And it looked like it was actually very forgiving as far as the second activation.
The timing.
I was thinking, this might be like very difficult ping pong for people to like get the right angle. But it looked like his positioning was less important and he just choose the direction.
Yeah, and it looked pretty fast and hard to dodge. So that part at least could be powerful.
I think you can like, if he doesn't turn on his anti-CC thing, you can like CC him or whatever, so then he can't hit the ram on the
I'm going to try jungling him. That's for fun.
I could see him support me
someone's lane, let him upgrade an item. Upgrade your jungle item while you're out there. That would be nice.
He could seem support as well. I mean, I know he's supposed to be a top laner, so he's probably been balanced around this, which usually means more scaling, less base stats, etc. But a lot of the stuff in the kit does feel kind of supporty. Hey, increase people's stuns. Hey, big ultimate that can initiate from far away. A pillar thing that gets behind them and can maybe block them in. So could be interesting to see how it goes. But we now have to talk about the NALCS playoffs that are coming up. It's going to be Dignitas versus TSM, one of our semifinals. Immortals versus CLG will be the other.
Yeah, let's start with talking about the quarterfinal matchups a little bit, like how they got here, because Dignitas for C9 was a good win for Dignitas.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That was one of those near reverse sweeps that we talk about, because they were 3 inhibs down in game 4 and came back to prevent the chance at a reverse sweep. but just the series in general, like the amount that Altec and Adrian, that bot lane has stepped up, is insane, right? Especially based on what was expected of those players and the fact that Dignitas just managed to kind of sign them in the middle of the season to now be one of the best bot lanes in the league.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is what was expected of those players like halfway through the season maybe, or like when we first saw Altec. Going into this matchup, we were very clearly all aboard the hype train.
All aboard the hype train.
As we're
Kobe wants to be very clear that we talked about Adrian and Altec.
Yes, our whole intro was about him. Anyways, those two guys, I wanted to bring up something that has been floating around, is that people keep talking about Altec as a very good shot caller for the team and how clear his communication is. And that has been something that has been coming out of the coaching staff for a while with Team Dignitas, this split of some of the reasons for them changing all of their substitutes. They're like Shrimp and Big, even way back when they had were rotating those guys. They were like, yeah, a lot of these moves are for communication, things that we're trying for coordination in game, and for everyone having all these positive things talking about Altec's like very clear communication seems to bode even better. Like their in-game play speaks for itself, and their bottom lane dominance was definitely apparent. But to also add that extra element, because the other thing in that series, their Baron plays and their team fighting were very crisp.
You've got to also say for Cloud9, a bit of a disappointing performance. I think that they fell short in a number of ways. They had some very kind of shocking plays. Even when you look at game one, Contracts going in top lane with almost no chance at a kill. At best, he's trading over a kill onto Maokai. This was after Impact had already been killed. He then flashes into a 1v2 to try to finish one person off. There were some very questionable decisions from Cloud9, and also these two first games, despite that, were actually very close. And game 4 was shocking that they didn't actually finish it off. And it came down to these little plays. I mean, in game 4, Sneaky actually, as they're on the Nexus turrets, getting caught by a seismic shove from Keen. So lots of credit to Keen, but also maybe Sneaky a little bit too greedy to try to step forward and shoot the turrets. You can wait for Supermans. I mean, let's be clear. This was a 10,000 gold lead with all 3 inhibitors down. You really just have to stand there and wait for all 6 super minions to be in, and the game is almost a guaranteed win. Like I feel like,
or Flash.
Yeah, or Flash. He had both summoners as well and his rocket jump. And in these scenarios, I feel like when triple inhib is down, it's got to be 95% chance to win or better.
So if you play properly, I think 3 inhibs down should be 100% win.
Yeah,
I was waiting for. I could see in your eyes. And he's like, do I want to say it? Do I want to say it?
I don't think there's a strategy or a team comp that's like, well, 3 inhibs down. As long as we play this right, we got it.
Yeah.
Like, you're never in that position in the first place.
Let me tell you about a little team called Counter Logic Gaming who did this on the international stage versus RNG. Had it all under control. I never doubted them. That team composition, perfectly tailored.
Yeah, they did it exactly the way they wanted to. No mistakes were made by RNG.
And to be fair, composition did play a part because this was a super buffed up Sivir with a Janna and a Nunu, and there's very few AD carries, even despite the mistakes from C9 and everything else going on. There's very few AD carries who can actually consistently clear out the waves with that level of pressure coming in from super minions, and a super buffed up Sivir is one of them.
I feel like Sivir or Azir are like a prerequisite for having
maybe
a good
Jinx
chance
with a Hurricane.
of finishing off that, or Jinx with a Hurricane, but like it's so unlikely, and it's not like C9 had potato scaling. They had Lucian as well as Tristana, so they were able to do a lot of good stuff. But yeah, like one thing that I think is important to touch on, I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are, because I know we were pretty upset in the morning. The like small community reaction of C9 and how we were like overhyping Jensen this entire year, and how we're not even talking about Dignitas's resurgence. I want to have a conversation about like why that could be happening versus how I don't agree with it. Right? I do think that Jensen got a lot of hype this split from the community, from the media, from us. And I think a lot of it was deserved. The dude had more kills than anyone has ever had in an NALCS split, with a poorly performing top lane, pretty much the whole split. Sneaky was good, but not great. And they won 12 games. So I don't actually think that they were overhyped, but I do think there were people that got tired of the storyline because it was happening so much.
I think that something that could definitely contribute to that was that slightly different stories of the same thread were coming from multiple different people, multiple different sources, multiple different areas. Like,
Yeah.
there was the trailers, and then there are individual rankings that people always group as Riot's.
My tier list in
Riot's,
week 6 had Jensen above Bjergsen for performance through 6 weeks in the North American LCS.
And people see that as the Riot tier list.
Yep.
Everyone
not
at
even
Riot
just tier list, they see it as Riot
ranking.
Like
or
Riot's
whatever.
narrative or something.
player ranking of all time or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, there are a lot of different sources that kind of like come together. And if you are on the other side of that argument and you keep seeing it presented in these different directions, then I can definitely get how they're feeling like overwhelmed by that story. But it's not like a group consensus or like plan to
just
push X.
Dispel the notion that there's just like some super producer being like, we must push Jensen as a
The
superstar.
Illuminati.
He gives us viewership.
If anything,
like,
it kind of lends a little credence to it, because it's like multiple different people independently came up with, Jensen's having a very good split or whatever, and so they wanted to. Anyways,
and then also like this is one thing that I sometimes think Double Stream can do a lot of times. Like I think Dignitas didn't get nearly as much exposure as C9 did in general, right? Because you're going to be watching the TSM games, the C9 games, the Immortals and the COG games. And then if Dignitas is playing one of those teams, you're probably going to watch Dignitas. But there's going to be that small group of Dignitas fans that are seeking out like every Dignitas game. Not to mention, their story was much harder to tell because it was so much more brief. Altec and Adrian came in towards the end of the split. And I think we were very honest and genuine about their improvement and how good they were. And you look at the intro and even about C9, like as far as the overhype that we're being accused of, the game intro, we say, yes, they did end the season well against poor opponents. Now we'll see if they can do it against a good one, right? We were very honest, I feel like, with this, but it all depends on where you're getting your exposures from.
I'd also say that very few people actually watch the full breadth of the
whole
broadcast.
broadcast.
People don't usually watch. Most people just watch the games. They don't watch the intros. They don't watch all these things. So sometimes you hear one part, but you don't actually hear people's caveats. You don't hear everything that people are saying about it. But
this is starting to sound like super defensive.
So
but I did want to say that during that series, I actually thought that people might be saying that I was biased for Team Dignitas because of how much we were hyping up the bottom lane and Team Dignitas. But anyways,
I think it's worth the conversation, right? Like threads like those don't happen by accident. There's always something behind what's happening, but I think it's important that we have the conversation about it. Anyway, Dignitas
Dig TSM.
won. Now it's Dig TSM is essentially what we're moving into. How do you see this playing out, Isaac?
It's been so hard for me going into Cloud9 Dig. We talked about it last week, and I had thought that Cloud9 would have the edge simply because I didn't know which Dignitas would show up. Dignitas had very high highs, very low lows. They have lost games against bad teams, won games against great teams, and it's still so hard for me to actually predict. I feel like TSM was clearly a better team than Cloud9 this split, and I also feel like Cloud9 had perhaps some uncharacteristic poor play in some of the matches against Dignitas. That being said, Dignitas at their best looks very, very good, right? But would TSM lose that game 4 from that lead? I don't think so. Would they make some of these plays? Perhaps. They're certainly not an infallible team, but I do think that TSM is a superior team. And the way that this series looked, I still feel like I am favoring TSM going into this against Dignitas. But I'm having trouble deciding, is that because of preconceived notions? Is that because I'm not sure like where their level is? Because I can see a world in which Dignitas comes in, plays their very best, and wins.
Yeah, and they have already beaten TSM.
Yeah.
They beat them with this roster.
Yeah.
They 2-0'd them in the regular season. But that was, what was it? Was that the Xerath and Jax games that they picked as soon as the patch had changed? And also, we're in 2017 and TSM's been in every single final. And this isn't looking like one of those off years for TSM. They look just as good as they've looked. So like that reputation buys you a lot of credit. And the fact that Team Dignitas team as an organization has only been in one other semifinal before, and that was in the summer of 2013. Never been to finals from there. Is a little bit of history because we obviously have to talk about the teams now. They're favored for sure, but man, if there was a time for them to be knocked off, because the mid lane champion pools have changed a fair bit, and because I've never seen this team Dignitas with an 80 carry shot caller. I'm kind of back and forth with you where I'm favoring TSM, but I'm not really sure.
I'm so hyped up for the bottom lane matchup. Again, because not only do they have two AD carry shot callers going against each other, but Adrian also has been like pretty outspoken. And this guy, even though he's had this reputation surrounding him of whatever the team life is like, and he has definitely bounced around a lot of teams, so that kind of adds to a lot of the rumors and stuff around what he's like in a team atmosphere. Him and Altec definitely have no issues, right? They get along extremely well. They have both talked about how much they've played with each other over the years and enjoyed solo queue and stuff like that. So it seems like there are zero internal issues for Team Dignitas.
Right.
And their bottom lane is extremely confident going up against Doublelift and Biofrost, who have always been the super confident, bottom lane. Anything with Doublelift in it, really. But I just feel like that is going to be kind of what this game hinges on, because not only are the bottom lanes so important right now, but also they're the shot callers for the teams. And I'm saying that with a game that has Bjergsen in it.
Yeah, and okay, one more thing that I was a little incoherent before with TSM versus Dignitas. Here's why I would favor TSM in this series. Spring Split, they were actually 15-3 versus Summer Split, where they're 14-4, even though they added Doublelift for Wild Turtle. So in that sense, they would be a little shakier. But I feel like every time Team Solo Mid has been challenged this split, where, oh man, they have Immortals coming up, they must win this series, they've been able to perform in the majority of those situations. I think they lost one to Cloud9. So I think that gives them a lot of confidence, not to mention they just have so much more experience in high-pressure games. And it hasn't always been good experience, but as I mentioned with KT Rolster, any experience in high-pressure situation is good experience in high-pressure situations. So I think they should be able to take care of Dignitas here.
Yeah, so do I. And the bot lane is going to be very exciting. And because the bot lane was such a big part of their win over C9, you feel like TSM has a better bot lane than C9. So they're probably won't have as much of an advantage. But you also have to say, despite the fact that TSM has made every finals, well, C9 had never lost to a team in playoffs other than TSM. So Dignitas is already knocking out some of this history. They're trying to rewrite history and show that they are this new team. And it would be pretty crazy. You can think that it's not that unrealistic to have Dignitas Immortals as the finals, right? Two new teams in the finals. And that would be pretty crazy, because we've been in this era where it has been the same teams in the finals for so long.
Yeah, and this is a small tangent. I think people always, when they're thinking about history, just like assume that it could have only ended that way. There are so many instances in sports history where like the craziest things decided something, and then that becomes the set. Like even the Cavs and Warriors always meeting in the finals. Like, oh yeah, they've clearly been the best three teams the past 3 years. The Warriors were down 3-1 to Oklahoma City Thunder with Kevin Durant in the playoffs, right? And then they fell. And then the KT Rolster being like 1-11 in games where they could go to Worlds. One game in those instances, and you're like, well, yeah, KT always makes Worlds. What are you talking about? Those things could actually happen. So there's been plenty of times in this TSM streak of finals where they probably shouldn't have gone. The split where they were the 6th seed, and then they made it all the way to the finals. There's been a lot of crazy stuff. So I agree with you. This is one where either team could definitely win.
And our other semifinals, Immortals versus CLG, that is another one with a lot of history. But first, let's touch on that CLG NV series. Jatt, you were casting it. That was a very long slugfest.
Man, I know in the week leading up, we were like, probably CLG 3-0 unless something crazy happens. The analyst desk all is predicting like CLG for the most part. Did you say it was going to be a little close?
I said 3-1.
Yeah.
Mark said 3-0.
But
both of us thought CLG had it.
This was super close to NV actually winning. They did a lot, and Seraph carried the Trundle game, which I think a lot of people didn't expect. The whole Darshan versus Seraph duo did not turn off as Darshan favored as I thought it would. And then particularly, it was the NV bottom lane that made this series super close, because they drafted themselves winning matchups, which we should not understate that they should have been winning matchups, but not by like 30 or 40 CS in the turret in every game. And that completely took Afromu and Stixxay out of the playmaking of the game, and it made it super, super close.
And while they did have some really strong lanes, especially in the earlier games, I don't think that Nautilus support is like,
That's
Nautilus
what I was
support,
saying.
he's a lane dominant guy.
He's
like,
not. He just kept landing all the hooks.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. Hakuo was on fire on all the hook champions. So he had his 3 Thresh games at the start, and yeah, that was more lane dominant. That was more, okay, they should probably win lane. When you go to Nautilus, Nautilus can only really win all-ins. You're not a trading, poke 'em down type champion, so that was very impressive for me, both the way they drafted to their own strengths and the way that they drafted in general, because Seraph was the biggest concern for me going into this series, and they gave him a lot of priority in some of these games. You know, the counter picks of Rumble into Shen, then Trundle, I think, into Maokai is an even better matchup than that. So they did get some pretty nice matchups in those regards, but just in general, he played at a higher level, and the bot lane was incredible. They seem to have kind of outclassed CLG's bot lane.
And remember, the bottom lane was also instrumental in getting Lyra ahead. They were constantly invading the jungle, trying to punish the Zac pick, punish the weak early start of him, and get Lyra this big lead in the jungle to try and snowball this early game. And what Envy are basically known for is that early game, and the change was basically the ability to transition that early game and actually come out with some clean looking victories versus CLG.
Because I actually didn't think Lyra had dominant early games. He was far ahead of Omar God, but then it was the team transitioning them that was the impressive part for me. But even with that being said, CLG still won the series. They 3-2'd, and the gut check, I think, in game 4, where they had that Drake team fight that MV tunneled into, after that it was CLG's game. And I really liked how they switched back what felt like pretty effortlessly to 1-3-1, especially in game 5 in what was a close game. Like the Corki and Camille split push, they looked very comfortable with that, and everything kind of felt like it fell into place. So I would hope that for CLG, they just continue to do that, right? Just practice trying to get your 1-3-1 ahead, and they're so good at that style, and they have been for years.
Yeah, this series was incredibly close, and I felt like the little bit that kicked CLG over the edge for the victory actually was the amount of time that these players have played together and that experience. Even though sometimes it feels like people are always talking about, oh yeah, the experienced players and the in-game shot calling and the ability to remain cool and calm under pressure. Afromu is like one of the most seasoned in-game shot callers that we have ever had in the North American LCS. He has been here since literally the very beginning of competitive League of Legends. And we really did also get to see kind of the benefits of CLG's multi-year mantra, basically, of focusing on team and team play actually kind of pay off here.
Yeah, it really did seem to. I'd also credit their in-series adaptation. They went into the series obviously thinking that the Zac pick was going to work out very well, and then playing around this style of scaling jungler was going to work very well. They saw even in game 1 that they won, it's not really working. They were getting held down very heavily. I believe it was Darshan had the post-game interview where he was kind of talking about this and the fact that, hey, this kind of cheesy strat that he called it of all these people invading, all these people trying to focus and stop Omar. Well, it's something, if it's working, it's not really cheesy. If you're doing it multiple times in a row and it's working, that's just
they're going to invade us with 2 people. What cheese? Everyone does that, dude.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. That's why I'm like, when I was talking about yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing to me, right? It's like that they actually changed, they adapted, they found a new way around this, and that was very promising. And I would also say, despite the fact that I felt like Afro and Stixxay got outplayed pretty heavily in lane, I think that they were very effective in later stages of the game, especially on the Tristana. I think that Stixxay looked really good in those last 2 games, but there was a lot. I was left with a lot of question marks about CLG. Some of the games and some of the individual performances seemed like much lower levels than I was used to. The Jinx game in particular, I don't know what your guys' thoughts on that were, but I thought Stixxay was really bad on Jinx. Like, there was some team fights where he's canceling 3-4 autos in a row. He's seeming like he's panicking, and that to me has always been his bread and butter, where he looks so smooth. It's like, you get this guy on a scaling champion, you get him to a team fight, watch him work his magic.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think that game was good either by Afro or Stixxay, but more so, they take all these questions now from the quarterfinals where they were supposed to be dominant, into the semifinals against Immortals, and they don't just immediately have answers to those questions. We know how strong Immortals has looked from a team play perspective. We know how Immortals has beaten COG twice in the regular season, and we're also trying to check how much crisper COG looked with the extra 2 weeks of practice with Omar God, and they didn't actually look that much crisper. So I don't think that any of those things bode well for COG against Immortals.
I feel like you can usually tell when there is a professional jungler that is not in control of the game, not the one making the proactive plays, not the one telling the team where he's going to go, but more the team requesting him to be X position in a couple minutes.
And then he'll try and figure out how to get there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It feels much more like this step. Step 1 is someone requests something. Step 2 is Omar figuring out how to appease them or accomplish X strategy, rather than junglers. You can always tell if they're the ones kind of leading the early game. And it really is about this early game and mid game, I thought, was the scariest weakness for CLG, because there are even a lot of team fights and team skirmishes where they would be the ones initiating it, but would not bring all of the possible tools that they could have brought to this fight.
Yeah.
And they get punished very quickly, which is the opposite of Immortals and how they got so many victories. And again, I guess maybe it could come back to that theme of experience and how Smithy really fits in well with those guys, and he's leading a lot of those plays.
Yeah, there's a clip that crystallizes that perfectly. It's in the highlights on the LoL Esports YouTube channel that have some voice comms. There is a fight where COG is doing the Baron setup, and they all peel off for Baron. Omar stays in the pit. Not only does he stay in the pit, in the middle of the fight, Darshan says, "Omar, get out of the pit." Right? Like, they're even mid-fight. He's not the one peeling off Baron. He's not even on the same page of peeling off Baron that everyone else was. That's a big problem.
It's really tough because when you're coming in as a rookie to this, you talk about experience, super experienced team that had the best international performance, in my opinion, from North America ever at MSI, right? This team with this huge amount of experience. They've won championships. They've gone to Worlds. They've done all these things. You're like, okay, well, I'm just going to go in. I'm just going to do what they tell me. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to do my best. The problem with that is you have to be reacting. You can't be thinking through every step. I can't wait for you to tell me what to do because it's often too late.
Yep.
You have to make these split decision in the game where it's like, oh, the AD carry stepped a millimeter too far forward, flashed on him, he's dead, right?
Yep.
And if you have to tell me to do that, well, he already took a step back and now it's too late. And
hey, man, wait until he steps a step far too forward and be ready to do that flash E. Like,
exactly.
You remind him in the middle of the game. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. And I do agree that you could tell oftentimes it felt like him being told to do something instead of doing it himself. There was one play that really stood out to me, and I immediately thought of that when you're talking about it, is there was a Gragas play where he had about, say, 10 or 15 seconds on until his ultimate, and he body slam flashes in immediately, and it just felt like they said, go, Omar, get the AD carry, right? And body slam flash hits him, but he has no ultimate, he has no step to actually follow up, and then it just kind of falls flat, and it felt like there was a few times where they're like, Omar, engage, and he goes in, he does what he's told kind of thing, but he didn't have all the tools to actually do it. He wasn't necessarily prepared for the play, but it feels at least like he is just trying to do what he is told or trying to fit in that way. We obviously don't know for sure. Maybe he just decided it was the best time to go in, but it does at least seem like that from the outside looking in.
Yeah, and it's going to be tested against Immortals, right? Xmithy knows the players, he knows the tendencies. He's been in control of Immortals. I think that's pretty clear. Ole and Cody Sun have been laning a lot better, right? You look at Afro and Ole. I think they both want to play the same way. They want to land playmaking skill shots in lane, get control, and then roam. It's just Ole's been doing it a lot more and a lot better than Afro with this split. So in those two key positions, Immortals is advantaged. Pobelter versus Huhi, I think that could go either way. I think Flame versus Hanser could go either way. So there's definitely ways where this series could become. I always say Hanser.
I was going to let it pass.
No,
Me too.
I don't know why. Flame versus Darshan in the
He's
top
always
lane.
got TSM on his brain.
You son of a bitch. That could go either way. So I think it's probably 3-1 for Immortals just because COG is still experienced enough.
Sorry,
and
now
good
I'm just
enough.
looking at your
Yeah, he
it
was
looks like a burlap sack. Like he's just wearing a
I've been
bag
wearing
of
this for an hour.
he's wearing a bag of potatoes. Every time I look over and you're having a really serious look on
Yeah.
your face, you have this great analysis. I'm just like, this
Yeah.
guy has a friggin' pigeon on his.
Yeah, that's the same thing. I don't get to see what I'm wearing, so I'm thinking everything's normal.
Can you switch it around for me real quick? Because I had enough of the pigeon.
Yeah,
I think we need a
I
you know,
think
different
1 hour. It's
aesthetic.
only 1 hour
the
per
cute
side.
anime grill.
There
Yeah.
we go.
All right, keep going. My prediction is Immortals 3-1.
Yeah, and I do think that most people will be looking at that. One area I always think that CLG can get an advantage is sometimes the draft, because I think that they prepare very intelligently for matches. And also talking about the mid lane, who he has a lot of Vel'Koz games recently. No one else is really playing it. He also has the Aurelion Sol you always have to take in consideration. So these are two champions that are kind of out in left field or whatever you want to say that you have to kind of pay attention to. You don't necessarily have to ban them, but you have to think about how they can work in the context of these games and play around it differently. So that can make it more difficult to prepare for.
Yeah, and the last thing that I would kind of want to touch on is a lot of people see the Immortals organization. Will they choke in playoffs again?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just Pobelter, right? And 4 new players. So I think that'll kind of be in the back of their mind.
Too.
But I don't think it's that big of a factor. The brand has one of those things, but they did a full rebuild. So I think it's a totally new experience for playoffs for them.
Definitely agree there. And also the fact that the new players are not like the old players in any kind of way, right?
Mhm.
They're completely different as far as the, kind of approach to the game as well. But yeah, I also think that it's going to be heavily favored towards Immortals to win this one. And so then the theoretical predicted finals that we have here would be Immortals versus TSM, which would be extremely hype.
And this happens in playoffs, right? There's a reason they're the number 1 and 2 seeds. Not to mention they get a bye. They just got to win best of 5. It's in the finals.
Yeah.
So it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be fun. Really excited for that. But we also have some Twitter questions, so we can hop on to one that actually I'm going to start with, even though it's not listed as the first one that I really like, is from Ben Carlson. He says, what makes a play, individual, or team good versus the opponent's play being bad or a misplay? And this is something that I always find interesting because sometimes people are like, oh, you're being very negative, or, oh, you're just being super positive. It's all fluff, right? Because everyone has their own opinion on what is good versus what is bad. If I hook you, is that a good play from me or is that a bad play from you? And I think that there's a lot of different pieces that you have to kind of break down on that. Who is advantaged in the play? Did you utilize all the tools that you have to actually avoid this? For example, if you're playing the Thresh and you flash, flay, hook me, maybe there was no actual time to react. But if I'm max range and you just walk up and throw that hook, well, in my opinion, I probably should have been able to react. So, in plays like that, I think it's always a bit of column A, a bit of column B. But it depends play to play.
Yeah. It ends up being a gut check in the moment, but if I had to kind of break down the mechanics of what is a good play versus a bad play, you can always say he got hit by that blitz hook in a super simplified manner. Oh, either the blitz is good or that guy shouldn't have been there. The break point for me for a good play to bad play is, did the guy that got hooked have a good reason for doing that thing and then get outplayed there? That's what can make the good play versus the bad play. Because if he's just wandering blindly by himself with his team in the back and nothing good could happen of him doing something and he gets killed, bad play. But if there's a whole number of reasons of why he's going to have to be there for his team and for the victory, and then the other team outsmarts him and makes the play, it's what changes it.
Yeah, I actually think that there are also 2 things that contribute to the phrasing that a caster will say in the moment. One of the biggest things that shows up in casting, I think, in moments like this are how much that person plays the game and at what level they play the game, because that is how you kind of judge, that was a very easy play. I see that all the time or whatever in my bronze games, or somebody kind of makes a bigger deal. And I think that fans definitely will notice that. And it's interesting because the fans' interpretation of it is also affected by their personal experiences. So those 2 windows affect it. Plus, sometimes I just say the wrong phrasing. Like, I'll be talking from one team's perspective from a previous play, and then I'll just say, oh, that hook, he dodged that hook or he missed that hook. Those 2 mean very different things, right? If somebody flashes out of the hook, but I say he missed that hook, then I'm like, oh God, well, he didn't actually miss that hook. The guy flashed it, but you were speaking, too quickly or something like that.
That's why phrasing is so important. And the way that we phrase things can really affect people's interpretation. Because if you
Mhm.
say, "Oh, he missed the hook," then maybe some of the fans are like, "Ah, what a dummy, he missed that," even if it's good. So it always feels real bad if you realize, "Ah, crap, I used the wrong one."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
a lot of it also comes down. Last thing I'd tag in is just, I think, was there a chance to actually react to the play? Like, was there something that they could have done better to avoid it? And sometimes there's actually not. And in those cases, it's almost always just a really good play.
Yeah. Another question, Dan. Only, what are your favorite memories of playoff buffs on players? I.e., Balls at Worlds 2015, Reckless at EU Spring 2017. You got some more playoff buff. Who just particularly shows up?
Faker.
My last playoff buff would have been Impact in Summer Split, where he top died. He wasn't looking good going into the playoffs, and then he actually did buff up and start destroying people, and was a big reason they made it. So that'll be one of them.
Yeah. I was thinking of high, but it is also kind of even just like gauntlets, if that is included in playoff
Mhm.
buff. But the thing about that is like the factor of how much what he brings to the team also is more important in those high pressure situations where like
Right.
definitive clarity within a game of we're going for X strategy or whatever always does help out in those type
Yeah.
of situations and stuff. And obviously he has the results
Yeah.
to speak
And
as
as
well.
Azelle mentioned, Faker legitimately does have a playoff buff. That guy shows up in the biggest moments.
Yeah, he's insane. And I also think, despite this question being asked about players, I think it's interesting to look at it from the perspective of what coaches kind of have the playoff buff, because I think it's oftentimes very different for coaches to prepare for, best of five as far as picks and bans. I think that that can be a really big story. And I think that you have to give credit to, guys like Coma, who are so masterful in preparing their pick and ban and tailoring it to specific teams, because that's where I think a lot of teams get an advantage as well.
Also, on that thread, for the top teams, it is a legitimate practice to try things out
Mhm.
in the normal season. So it's not even like a playoff buff. It's like an intentional change of, yes, we were trying something and we were okay with the increased
Mhm.
risk of trying this on stage. Now we're in playoffs. No, we're playing like X strategy that is proven.
This is what we have decided is the best based on the entire year, and now we will play it, and now we will crush you. And now we got the last question here from Fantoon at Zingzima, something like that. What do y'all think of famine builds / cheese builds when you're getting smashed? Smart or nah? I think he's just talking about, you're behind, you're adapting your build. I've heard this as, the welfare build, famine build, whatever you want to call it. I think that it is smart to adapt your build. I personally really hate when people are like, well, I'm Hecarim. I build Triforce first. I'm 0-17, so let me get a Sheen. Well, the problem with that is you're going to get the item so late. You're actually more, okay, maybe you think that the Triforce Hecarim, I'm just going to choose a different example, Kobe, before you can actually get me on that one. But J4, for an example, right? If they're actually building a damage item and they're going towards their Titanic or their Black Cleaver second, when they're getting absolutely slammed, I think that's awful. Build a Knight's Vow, build tank, do something to be useful and survive.
I will approve if you are 0-17 on Hecarim,
Don't build a Sheen.
when you are trying to buy your Sheen, which is like, what is that, like 700 gold, 900 gold or something like that? If you are 0-17 that early in the game on like your second
You
back,
got problems.
then do not build a Trinity Force.
That
There
guy
you go,
cheese,
Zell.
Kobe. It was a bad game.
You are correct. That is when you do not build a Trinity Force on Hecarim.
Yeah. Well, for instance, I have an example of this. Your cheese build would be attack speed Volibear. You cannot do that while you are behind.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are smurfing or you're better than your opponent, so you're out to the lead, then you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's also dependent on certain champions, right? If you're an 80 carry and you're down in lane, don't start building a Randuin's, it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. But if there are more defensive options that make a lot of sense for your
Mhm.
champion, tank versus DPS. If you're snowballing on a Rek'Sai, hey, great, grab that Black Cleaver, start smashing some people. Oh, you're way behind, build a nice Vow, build a Locket,
Yeah.
transition your build, survive lane, because there's nothing more frustrating for me, especially I see it, I feel like more often in top lane than anything else, where I just watch a Jace first blood my Shen or whatever, right? And he's like, okay, I'm gonna buy a couple long swords, go towards that Tiamat. It's my first buy. Well, good luck with that,
Yeah.
bud.
And also, if your main goal is to win, don't do a cheese build, right? Do whatever you think is best.
Yeah, I just think that you should always build to the champion that you're playing. Some of them have viable tank options and viable DPS options. In those cases, yes, you can go the tank one, when you're behind or whatever, but don't make your champion useless by building tank if that's not an originally like viable option for that
Yeah.
champion type, like you're talking about 80 carries or something.
Yeah.
Because then your champion actually accomplishes nothing.
Yeah, you have no win condition.
Yeah.
Ah, sweet. So thank you very much for the Twitter questions. That's going to do it for this episode of The Dive, and I'll be able to take this off. Next week, we are streaming this live, 3 p.m. Pacific time. We're going to try and get some type of interaction with the live stream. I think our producers are going to be sending us messages in Slack for some pretty critical things if they exist. So make sure you're flaming us as much as possible, and we will hear about it.
Yeah, and we'll answer them live.
Yeah. Ooh, all right.
We'll flame you back.
The other two will agree with that person, and then
Yeah.
I'll just feel bad.
Yeah, that would feel pretty bad. Also, remember to tune into the semifinals with TSM versus Dignitas and Immortals versus CLG this weekend. We will see you there. Unfortunately, this is the last we will get to see of the body pillow. So I would like you to take a bow
don't
one
speak
last
too quickly.
time.
What did you expect
Jatt.
this to look like? It looked worse than I thought it would.
It looks great, and you look great.
All right, we're done with the show. I'll stand up.
I'll see you guys next time.